Back in the late 80s, researchers at Stanford University ran this experiment where they brought in a group of preschool-aged kids, like 4 and 5 years old, and they had them sit around this small table. On the table sat a yellow sponge, like one that you have under your kitchen sink. Then, in full view of the kids, what they did is they carved the sponge. They gave it a bunch of jagged edges and then took a paintbrush and slowly painted the sponge to look like a rock. When the paint dried, the researcher held up the sponge and he said, "What is this?" At first, the children sort of hesitated, like there was a few whispers, there were some giggles. Then almost as one, they said, "Well, it's a sponge that you cut and painted to look like a rock." What the researchers did next is they tried a similar demonstration with toddlers barely past their first birthday. This time, the reaction was quite a bit different, because to them, carving and painting the sponge changed the thing in itself into something fundamentally different. What this study suggests is that our understanding of something depends less on how it looks and more on the mental framework that we already have for it. So the older kids already knew what a sponge was. So even whenever it looked like a rock, their minds still placed it in the category of sponges. But the toddlers didn't have that framework yet. So whenever the appearance changed, the thing itself changed too. And this all raises a bigger question, which is, if what we see depends so much on what we already know, then how do we know what anything is? You look at something like a shoe, a cup, a tree, and you just know what it is automatically. You don't have to study it. You don't have to dissect it or measure it. You just recognize it, and the knowing of it is immediate. Like, for example, what makes this cup a cup? Is it the shape? Is it the size? Is it the material? What if it was made out of wood instead of made out of glass? What if it didn't have a handle? It's sort of big enough to look like a bowl? At what point would this stop being a cup and start being a bowl? The truth is that you don't recognize this cup by its physical details alone. You recognize it by something that your mind does automatically. You recognize it by the kind of thing that it is. You don't just see this cup. You see a cup, one of many different kinds of cups, and your mind connects this to every other cup that you've ever seen. It finds a resemblance. It compares the shape, the size, the function, and the context, and once it feels like a match, it gives the thing a name. And this happens with everything, with people, with places, with gestures, with feelings. You recognize by sorting things, by grouping, by linking what's present to what's already known. What this means fundamentally is the world that you live in isn't out there. It's a kind of mirror. What you perceive in the external world is constantly shaped by the internal world that you bring to it. So here's an example of what I mean. Imagine two people walking side by side down the same bike path, and up ahead, there's a guy walking towards him with a golden retriever on a leash. Whenever the dog sees the two people coming, let's say that he gets really excited and his tail starts wagging, he's pulling on the leash and he's just like really eager to say hello. One of the two people walking sees this and he lights up whenever he sees the dog. He kneels, reaches out his hand to pet him. He sees a friend in the dog. But the other person sort of freezes and they try not to pay any attention to the dog. They look away. One person sees a friend, the other one sees a threat. And this might sound kind of abstract, but stay with me. What's happening is the real dog in front of them is triggering a memory, a pattern built from all the other dogs that they've ever met and everything that those dogs represent. So this real dog, the physical one right here, becomes a kind of stand-in shortcut for an entire story about what all dogs are like. And psychologists tell us that this happens because of something called associative memory, which is the mind's tendency to link similar experience together. What this looks like is this. So let's say that you meet a new person and something about their voice or their mannerisms subconsciously reminds you of someone else. That shapes how you respond to them. Like your subconscious says, this new person that I just met is like that other person that I already know. And the mind just builds a bridge and connects the two. That's how the smell of sunscreen can automatically remind you of the beach, or how the smell of cinnamon rolls can remind you of your grandma. And this whole process isn't something that you think about explicitly. You just know, like you know when someone's joking. Like you know what a joke is because you've heard enough of them to feel the rhythm. You've laughed at it or not. And whenever something follows that same shape, your mind places it in the same group. So what I'm really saying here is everything new is understood through the lens of something already known. Your thoughts aren't these clean, isolated scientific facts that are floating around in your mind. They're these categories that are in this constant dynamic motion. Every time that you think, you're placing something like a feeling or a memory or a moment into some kind of mental category, and you're saying this new thing that I'm experiencing is kind of like that thing that I already know about. That's what thinking is underneath it all. It's a process. Something new shows up and your mind immediately asks, where have I felt this shape before? What kind of thing is this? So you could say that thinking is sort of an alchemical process. It's what happens when the unknown is pulled into and assimilated into the known. It's when a new moment is understood in the light of past experience. And wisdom comes from having enough of those past experiences so that the unknown never completely feels unfamiliar. You start to recognize the shape of things even whenever you don't know what the exact situation is. There are things you're probably feeling right now, like questions that you can't explain, emotions that you can't explain. You're trying to make sense of something and it just doesn't quite have a shape in your mind yet. What you're missing is an internal category that is familiar with this situation. And if you don't have that, you have to take action. You have to step into the unknown. You have to act. Because readiness only comes after experience. So you have to make that jump. An important thing to understand here is that your identity or your sense of who you are was forged in this tension between being confused and being clear on something. Over and over again, life has placed you in situations where you weren't quite prepared for it. Moments that demanded something from you. And you didn't know what to do. So you had to act before you were ready. You had to step forward and build the understanding as you moved. And that slow, painful process of turning the unknown into the known, of turning uncertainty into structure, that's how you've been building yourself all along. And in that process of building yourself, you were telling yourself stories about what all those moments meant and the kind of person you had to become because of them. What this means is that your entire sense of self is a story that's been shaped by the categories you placed yourself into. I'm the kind of person that doesn't give up, or I care too much about what people think, or I'm just not built for long-term relationships. These are ideas that started somewhere. They started out as a pattern that you noticed or a feeling that stuck with you. And now, because you've returned to it so often, those biased impressions of you, those biased impressions that you have of yourself have started to feel like truth. They started to feel like something that you are instead of something that you just believe. And if this is true of your perception of yourself, then it's equally true of how others perceive you. Right now, this very second, there are versions of you living inside the minds of people that you've met. Some of them love you. Some of them don't trust you. Some of them think that you're smart. Some of them think that you're weak. Some of them see you as confident, and others are convinced that you're just insecure and trying to hide it. And none of them are wrong from their own point of view. But they're not seeing you either. They're seeing what you remind them of. They're seeing their own projection of you, a kind of reflection of their own expectation. You remind them of someone or of something or of some moment in their past that makes them say, they remind me of one of those kinds of people. And you're doing the same to them. So truthfully, you think that you know your friend or your partner or your colleague, but what you know is actually a version of them shaped by your expectations. Even the ego, the I in your head that you believe that you are, is a story that you keep alive. So what does this mean? It means that who you are is constantly being interpreted through 1,000 private lenses that you didn't design and you can't control. Every person you meet builds a version of you out of what you trigger in them. You're not a fixed physical thing. You're a symbolic being. You're a shape made of memories and stories. You're a spirit being refracted through the eyes of everyone who's ever met you. This ultimately means that you don't live in the world. You live in your world, a personal world constructed by the stories that you carry, the patterns that you've inherited, and what you've accepted as true. And in that realization, you're faced with a profound responsibility that you must choose what kind of lens you're going to look through, because your lens becomes your world. And if you want that world to be clearer, richer, more honest, then you must become clearer, richer, and more honest. You have to challenge the stories that you keep telling yourself. You have to stop mistaking familiarity for truth. You got to reach into the unknown with humility and with courage and let go of who you were in service of who you might become. So in the end, the question isn't just what do you see in the world? It's what are you bringing with you into the seeing? Every perception is shaped by what's already inside of you. And that means that if you want to change your world, you don't start by rearranging the outside world. You start by reorganizing yourself internally, what you know, what you believe, what you're willing to question. Because in the end of it all, the shape of your reality will always follow the shape of your thoughts.